Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling a topic that I think is on everyone's mind these days,
Cool.
inflation. We've got some really interesting research here, and it compares inflation to kind of a hidden tax, even using a loaf of bread as an example to
Interesting.
help us understand it better. So are you ready to explore how inflation is silently shrinking the value of your money?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
I think, we all experience it, but it can feel a bit mysterious. So let's break it down.
Okay, perfect. So this research starts with a very basic definition. Inflation is just a general increase in prices over time,
Right.
but then it gets into this really interesting idea of it being a hidden tax.
Hmm.
Can you unpack that a little bit for our listener?
Sure. Imagine you have, let's say, 100 euros in savings today.
Okay.
A year from now, with even just like a modest 3% inflation,
Yeah.
that same 100 euros is only going to buy you what 97 euros worth of goods would buy today.
Wow.
So it's like your money's kind of slowly shrinking.
Yeah. That's a really clear way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And the source actually uses this example of a loaf of bread.
Fine.
So let's
Cool.
say it costs €1 today, but then a year later, it's €1.10.
Right.
That extra 10 cents, that's inflation, eating away at your purchasing power.
Exactly. And it happens, kind of across the board with a wide range of goods and services.
Right.
So even if you're getting like a slight salary increase, you might still find yourself struggling to maintain the same standard of living.
Okay, so we've got this like price creep happening all the time.
Yeah.
But what actually fuels it into like full-blown inflation, the source here breaks it down into four main causes.
Okay.
And they call them the four villains of inflation.
I love that.
I do too.
The four villains.
So I'd love for you to kind of walk our listener through each of those,
Sure.
starting with demand pull inflation.
Okay, so demand pull inflation. Think of it this way. Everyone suddenly wants the latest gadget.
Right.
There's a very limited supply. Prices skyrocket. Supply and demand.
Yeah.
Remember the chip shortage
Yeah.
and how that impacted car prices? That's demand pull inflation.
Okay, so limited supply, high demand,
Yep.
prices go up. Got it. Now, what about cost push inflation? I feel like we hear about this one a lot, especially with, rising oil prices and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cost push inflation is all about the increasing cost of production.
Yeah.
So imagine oil prices surge, like we've seen recently. Suddenly, transportation costs more.
Right.
It costs more to deliver goods to stores.
Yeah.
Manufacturing costs rise because, a lot of industries rely on oil. These costs get passed on to us, the consumers, as higher prices.
So it's like a chain reaction.
It is,
That
yeah.
starts with,
Classic,
a
yeah.
key input like oil and ripples through the whole economy.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the third villain, monetary inflation.
Yes.
This one always feels a little bit more abstract to me.
Yeah.
Can you help me and our listener understand it a little bit better?
It does sound complex.
Yeah.
But imagine the government just printing tons and tons of new euros.
Okay.
Suddenly, all those euros that are out there circulating are competing for the same amount of goods and services.
Right.
It's kind of like diluting the value of each euro that's already out there.
Okay.
Your existing euros buy less, and you get inflation.
So too much money, chasing the
Did we
same amount of stuff,
Chasing the same stuff.
driving prices up. Okay, I'm with you. Now, the final villain on this list is external shocks.
Yes.
This one sounds like the wild card of the bunch.
It is. These are those unexpected events that can really, throw things off globally in the economy.
Yeah.
Think about the early days of the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Supply chains were disrupted,
Right.
leading to shortages of,
Yeah.
everything from toilet paper to computer chips.
Oh, yeah. I remember those empty supermarket shelves.
Yeah, and prices went crazy.
Yeah.
Demand spiked and supply struggled to keep up.
So we've got demand pull, cost push, monetary and external shocks.
The four villains?
All these factors all working, maybe together, maybe independently to push prices higher.
Yeah.
But what does this actually mean for our everyday lives?
Right.
How does it actually hit our wallets?
That's the key question. And the source dives into some concrete examples here that might resonate with our listener. Let's start with the most obvious impact. The rising cost of living,
Okay.
Yeah,
it's that feeling like everything is just getting more and more expensive.
It is.
Groceries and gas and rent and utilities.
Right.
It all adds up.
Yeah, and this research points out that essential items, the things that we kind of, can't avoid buying,
Right.
are often the ones that are hit the hardest.
Yeah.
So you think food, energy, housing,
Yeah.
these are the core expenses that really eat into a budget when those prices start to go up.
And, for people on fixed incomes like retirees or people with disabilities, this must be especially tough.
Absolutely. If your income is staying the same while prices are going up, you're essentially losing purchasing power every single month.
Yeah.
It's a real struggle to make ends meet.
Yeah. The source also talks about the impact on savings, and I think this is something that a lot of people don't really fully consider.
Yeah, it's a little insidious because it's not as immediately obvious as, seeing the price of milk go up at the grocery store.
Right.
But let's say you have 10,000 euros sitting in a savings account earning a measly 1% interest while inflation is chugging along at 3%.
Yeah.
You're actually losing 2% of the value of your savings every year.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
It's like it's silently chipping away at, our hard-earned money even when we're trying to be responsible.
Right.
But wait a minute. I remember that the research said that inflation isn't always a bad thing.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Yeah, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but a little bit of inflation can actually be a healthy thing for an economy.
And
think about it. When prices are steadily increasing,
mm-hmm.
even at a low rate, people are more likely to spend or invest their money
Right.
rather than just hoarding it.
Because they know it's going to be worth less if they just let it sit there.
Exactly. So this increased spending and investment can actually stimulate economic growth,
Okay.
lead to more jobs and higher wages over time.
So it's like a gentle push to keep the economy moving forward.
It is.
But I'm guessing there's like a sweet spot, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a level of inflation that's considered good.
There is. You get it.
Okay.
Most economists agree that around 2% is ideal.
Okay.
It encourages economic activity without causing too much instability.
Right.
But if it gets out of control, that's when we see the really negative effects, like
Yeah.
hyperinflation or stagflation.
Okay. And that's where those big players in the economic game,
Yeah.
the central banks, they come in, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like the referees trying to keep inflation in check.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Their goal is to maintain price stability,
Okay.
keep inflation at that sweet spot, around 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a few powerful tools that they use to do that.
Yeah.
One of the most well-known is manipulating interest rates.
Okay, I hear about interest rate hikes all the time in the news, but I'll be honest, I don't always really get what they do.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me and our listener?
Sure. Interest rates are essentially the cost of borrowing money.
Okay.
So when a central bank raises interest rates, it becomes more expensive for people and businesses to take out loans.
Right.
And this can have a cooling effect on the economy, slow down spending, and in theory, bring inflation down.
So it's like tapping the brakes on economic activity.
Exactly.
What are some of the other tools that they have in their arsenal?
Well, they can also directly control the money supply.
Okay.
Literally decrease the amount of money that's circulating.
Wow.
Less money sloshing around means less money chasing goods and services, which can help curb inflation. Kind of like taking some air out of an overinflated balloon.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And I remember the research mentioned something called reserve requirements.
Yes.
What are those all about?
Reserve requirements are a way for central banks to influence how much money banks can lend out.
Okay.
So by increasing the amount of money that banks have to hold in reserve, they're limiting the amount that's available for lending.
Okay.
Which again can help to cool down spending and rein in inflation.
So they're like tightening the reins a little bit on the banks to
yeah.
keep them from lending too freely and potentially fueling inflation.
Yep.
Okay, fascinating stuff. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about what individuals can actually do to protect themselves from inflation's bite. This research offered some really practical advice, and I think our listener is probably eager to hear it. So
absolutely. Let's dive into some strategies for safeguarding your finances in an inflationary environment. One of the most effective, although it can feel a little daunting, is investing.
Investing. Okay, that always feels a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Where do you even begin?
The key is to look for assets that tend to hold their value or even increase in value during periods of inflation.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Real estate is a classic example.
Okay.
Property often appreciates in value over time, especially in desirable locations. Then there's gold, a traditional safe haven asset that tends to hold its value when other investments are struggling.
Okay.
And of course, there are stocks and bonds, although those can be more volatile and require a bit more knowledge to navigate successfully.
So spreading your money across different types of investments can help kind of create a buffer against inflation.
It can.
But what if you don't have a lot of extra cash to invest?
Yeah.
Are there other things that people can do?
Definitely one of the most important strategies, and one that's often overlooked, is reducing unnecessary expenses.
Okay, that sounds like common sense.
It is.
But where do you even start?
It all boils down to taking a close look at your budget
Mm-hmm.
and identifying areas where you can cut back without sacrificing your overall quality of life.
Yeah.
Maybe it's eating out less, finding cheaper entertainment options, being more strategic with your grocery shopping.
Right.
Little changes can add up.
So it's all about, making your money stretch further,
Right.
making those euros or dollars work harder for you.
Right.
What else can you do to boost your, financial resilience in the face of inflation?
The source also recommends diversifying your income streams.
Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Having multiple sources of income provides a safety net if one stream dries up or is affected by inflation.
Right.
It could be a side hustle, freelancing, doing online courses,
Mm-hmm.
even investing in dividend-paying stocks.
Okay.
The key is to have multiple streams of income flowing into your financial reservoir.
I love that analogy. Multiple streams feeding your financial river. Okay, so we've got investing, cutting expenses, diversifying income.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else people can do to stay ahead of the inflation curve?
One more tip from the source,
Yeah.
and it's especially relevant now with interest rates on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
Pay off fixed-rate debt.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain why that's a smart move in an inflationary environment.
Think of it this way. Inflation actually makes fixed-rate debt cheaper over time.
Okay.
So let's say you have a 10,000 euro loan at a fixed interest rate of 2%.
Mm-hmm.
If inflation is running at 4%, the real value of that debt is shrinking faster than the interest is accruing.
Wow.
It's like getting a discount on what you owe.
So by paying down that debt, now you're essentially saving yourself money in the long run.
You are,
Yeah.
especially if you have high-interest debt like credit cards.
Right.
It's a wise move to prioritize paying that down as quickly as possible.
This has been so eye-opening. We've covered so much ground.
Oh, you have.
From the four villains of inflation to these practical strategies for protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to remember about inflation?
I think the most crucial point is that inflation is a complex but constant force in our economic lives.
It's like an undercurrent that's always there,
It is.
influencing our financial decisions, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And its impact varies depending on individual circumstances.
Right.
So that's why understanding how it works is so important.
Yeah.
It empowers you to make informed choices to protect your financial well-being.
Wow. I feel like I just got like a masterclass in inflation. I knew it was important, but I had no idea how much it, really impacts our daily lives and financial decisions.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics that's always lurking in the background.
Right.
But understanding it can really change how you approach everything from budgeting to investing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into inflation, what's like the one big question you want our listener to ponder as they, go about their day?
I'd say this. How can you use this newfound knowledge of inflation to make smarter financial decisions, both big and small?
That's a great challenge, whether it's deciding when to make a major purchase or, figuring out the best way to save for retirement or even just thinking about how inflation affects your grocery budget.
Mm-hmm.
This knowledge can really empower you.
Absolutely. It's about, recognizing that inflation is this constant factor.
Right.
And by understanding it, we can make it work for us
Yeah.
rather than against us.
Well said. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic.
Absolutely.
Arm yourself with knowledge, stay curious, and remember,
Yeah.
inflation doesn't have to be a villain in your financial story.
No, it doesn't.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.